Well, good morning, Campus Church. Happy Resurrection Sunday. Oh, please, come on, people. I tried not to go for another round after something like that, but that needed another round. So well done on the second time. I mean, Easter is the biggest day of the church calendar. Now, for some, the thought is that we only celebrate Easter once a year, but here at Campus Church, we celebrate Easter 52 times a year because every Sunday we gather together because of what Jesus did on Easter Sunday. So, man, if you're a guest with us, let me just say thank you so much for carving out part of your Sunday to hang out with us here at Campus Church. It is great to have you. If we haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Nate, and I get to serve on the team here. And I'd love after the gathering to meet you out in the lobby while we eat a fruit cup together and maybe a donut. It'd be great to get to know you and say hello. But I am pumped, man. I love Easter Sunday morning. Like I said, it's the biggest day of the church calendar, and what a gift it is to be able to gather together, to worship Jesus together, and then to learn about what Easter is really all about. So to kick things off this morning, I've got a question for you. Have you ever found yourself ordering something, coming in the mail? In fact, some of you probably have Amazon gifts en route right now coming to your house. They might be on your porch when you get home today. Maybe you're going to get a picture during this, like a text of the picture of where they place your package while we hang out here this morning together. So we're all familiar, right? You order something online, it comes to your house, you excitedly open up that package and open it up. And have you ever opened it up and thought to yourself, or maybe you said out loud, well, that's not what I bought. That's not what I paid for, right? Like it comes to you and you had these grand expectations of whatever this thing was. That's why you ordered it. And it shows up to your house. You're like, that is not what I paid for. Well, we live in an interesting time nowadays because we have the internet, right? And we have Yelp and we have Google reviews and we can go on Amazon and we can see who else purchased these items, and we can buy with a lot of confidence nowadays, can't we? That we're going to, like, whatever we receive, we're going to get what it was that we were wanting. That's like, yes, that's what I paid for. Well, back in the 90s, we didn't have such a thing as Google reviews. We didn't have Amazon. We didn't have any of that. In fact, if we wanted to order something online, you got a magazine, you cut out the article, you mailed it in with your check, and you hoped to get whatever it is that you had ordered. Well, you can imagine back in those days, there was a lot of people thinking, well, that's not what I paid for. There was this guy named Steve Commissar. The FBI called him the Don of Con. He also had another nickname called Brett Champion. Here's the deal. If you got three names, something shady's going on, okay? You got shady business happening. This guy has three names, and he capitalized on that time, that season of life, of humanity, when you could scam people out of money pretty easily. And he had a great scam going. Inside of national magazines, he put out an ad, an article, that said that you could buy a solar-powered clothes dryer. Solar-powered clothes dryer, $49.95. You too could have a solar-powered clothes dryer. Seemed amazing. In his own words inside of the article, it was scientifically proven in space age. Like, sign me up. $49, I'm all in on this thing. And thousands upon thousands of people have the same opinion that I did. Like, I want one of those things. So they clipped out the magazine article. They sent in their $49.95, waited with great anticipation for their solar-powered dryer to show up. And when it came in the mail, it came in a far smaller box than they anticipated, because when they opened it up, all they had was a section of clothesline. He's not wrong. It is a solar-powered dryer, scientifically proven. In fact, you could try it today. You could check it out. Like, put your stuff out in the sun today, get it wet, put it out there. It will dry by the end of the day, right? Now, I don't know about space aged. It comes from space, UVs. But you can imagine why the FBI shut this guy down. Like, thousands upon thousands of people mailed in, like, millions of dollars this guy made on this scam. They send out this advertisement in hopes of getting a space-aged, solar-powered dryer, only for it to show up, and it's just a piece of rope. Thousands of people opened the box, and they said, well, that's not what I paid for. And we're all familiar with that. And it's one thing, right? It's one thing to get scammed out of a little bit of money, pursuing a promise that doesn't bring any sort of fulfillment. It's a whole other thing when you've dedicated your life to the pursuit of that promise, isn't it? It's a whole different thing. It's one of the $49.95, big deal. But when you spend your life pursuing something that cannot fulfill you, now that's a far bigger deal, isn't it? In fact, Johnny Manziel, or Johnny Football as he is called, he experienced this. Johnny Manziel, he was an up-and-coming star, born and raised in Texas, dream job for a Texan, a young Texan, is to play for Texas A&M. And in 2012, that's exactly what happens to Johnny Football. I mean, when you have the nickname Johnny Football, you better show up. That's a tall order, right? Well, he does. He shows up, and in 2012, he gets recruited to Texas A&M, and he starts putting up incredible numbers. Like, he's the youngest Heisman Trophy winner of all time as a freshman. He's a phenom, and he is on a rocket ship towards realizing his lifelong goal, his lifelong dream of playing in the NFL. And it finally comes to fruition in 2016 when he's drafted by the Cleveland Browns. I mean, that was a bummer, for sure. I'm sure he was hoping for a different team to draft him. But he gets drafted by the Cleveland Browns, and all of a sudden, he goes into an absolute tailspin. Just a complete and utter tailspin. His life begins to unravel and fall apart. And in a very vulnerable moment on his Netflix special called Untold, Johnny Football, he says this about that season of his life. He says, when I got everything that I wanted, I think I was the most empty I had ever felt inside. Now, Johnny's story is not isolated. He's not an anomaly. In fact, you could take any profession out there. You could take the business world, you can take athletics, you can take music and arts, and there's story after story after story of people who were in absolute pursuit of a dream, that once that dream was realized, what they realized is it didn't come through on its promise. We've all experienced it. We've been in pursuit of something. We've put our ultimate hope in something that just simply did not come through. And we're left scratching our head saying, that's not what I paid for. That's not what I gave my life for. Like, as I watched that Netflix special of Johnny Manziel, my heart broke for him because I know that his life was fully dedicated to realizing that dream that could never pay off in the end. It did not have in it what he needed to get out of it, which begs a question for each of us here this morning, a question that I hope you wrestle with throughout the rest of our time together. My hope is that it leads you to a decision by the time we're done here today. But even if it doesn't lead you to a courageous decision this morning, that this question will continue to roll around in your mind and you really get down to the bottom of this right here. What promise are you pursuing? What promise are you pursuing? Because I would say this, there is nobody here this morning in this auditorium. There's nobody listening online. In fact, I would go so far as to say there has never been anybody on the face of the planet that has not been in pursuit of some sort of promise. Everybody is pursuing a promise. Or another way to say it is, everybody is pursuing a gospel. Everybody's pursuing a gospel. And when I use gospel in this context, I'm using it in its most simplest form and its broadest sense of the term, and it simply means this: a set of principles or beliefs. Every one of us are on a journey pursuing some sort of principle or belief in our life, and that's what set us on the trajectory that we're currently on. Oftentimes, we do it unwittingly. We do it subconsciously. We're not even mindful of the fact that we are making decisions based on a promise that we are hoping will pay off someday in the end. Everybody is pursuing a gospel. And every gospel has three aspects to the gospel. The first is it has a promise. It's got a promise. There is a carrot at the end of whatever it is you're pursuing. You think, if I get there, then I will finally get the prize, right? It's the carrot on the end of the string that keeps you running after it. It's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Like, use whatever metaphor you want to use, but it has a promise. It's telling you it's going to fulfill something inside of you if you pursue after it. Every gospel also has a pathway. There's a road that you must take in order to get that realized. And every gospel has a payment. So it's got a promise, it's got a pathway, and it's got a payment. And I'm going to make an incredible declaration this morning on Easter Sunday, and it is this: Jesus provides where all other promises fail. We are all in pursuit of a promise somewhere. But Jesus provides where all other promises fail. And that's why we say with great confidence, Jesus is the hope for humanity. Jesus is the absolute. Jesus is bolded, all caps, underlined, highlighted. He is the hope for humanity. He's not a hope. He's not one of many hopes. He's not a potential hope. He is the hope for humanity. Outside of a relationship with Jesus, there is no ultimate hope. And friends, Easter Sunday is the best validation for that bold claim that Jesus is the hope for humanity. Easter Sunday is the best validation. In fact, when Jesus was asked, and he was asked an incredible question by people who were following him. So Jesus shows up on the scene, born in a manger. We celebrated that, several months ago. And he grows into maturity, and about 30 years old, he begins his earthly ministry where he's going around doing amazing things. He's teaching like no other teachers of his time. He's doing things like healing the sick, raising the dead, right? Blind eyes are able to see, deaf ears are able to hear, mute mouths are able to talk, like incredible things. Like people from all over the place. There was such large crowds following Jesus that they could not count all of the people. Like he fed thousands of people with just a small offering of food. Like incredible things. And he was making bold claims. Bold claims how he was the Son of God. And that we had to follow after him. And as he made these claims, people started to ask questions. And one of the best questions that I think every human being has got to ask is this: why should we believe you? Why should we believe you? Sometimes we're afraid to ask that question. But I think that that's a question that every human being has to wrestle down. Why should we believe who Jesus is? And when Jesus was asked this question, he pointed to his resurrection as proof. See, Jesus pointed forward to a future event, and he staked his reputation on the resurrection, and that's what we celebrate at Easter. We celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So this day, today, Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, is the best proof for you of why you can put your hope and trust in Jesus, why we say that he is the hope for humanity. You see, history tells us that there was a man named Jesus who lived, who died, who was buried, and then 3 days later there was an empty tomb. That's history. Those are undisputed facts. Any historian worth their weight does not dispute the reality that a man named Jesus lived, died, was buried, and there was an empty tomb when it was all said and done. Now, why the tomb was empty, that's where disagreement begins to arise. People have lots of opinions and theories about that. You can Google that later on your own. Lots of theories out there. But in my time of wrestling down this question, why should I believe Jesus is who he says that he is? What I recognize is all other theories around the resurrection had bigger faults with it than just the reality that Jesus was God and he came back to life. So history tells us Jesus lived, died, buried, 3 days later, empty tomb. In fact, a historian around Jesus' time, his name is Flavius Josephus. In his writing, Antiquities of the Jews, he wrote this around AD 97, so roughly 64 years after Jesus had passed away. He was a historian, so he's writing from a historical perspective, not from a believer perspective, which I think is really valuable because I know some in here, you're not followers of Jesus. You don't ascribe to the scriptures being authoritative in your life. So this is somebody who's not writing as a believer, but as a historian. And this is what he had to say about Jesus. Now, it's a little bit risky reading it because it's kind of a big chunk, and he writes way different than we read. So it's a bit clunky, but bear with me because I think what he has to say is super valuable. This is what he says. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. Back in Jesus' day, the humanity was split into two different groups. There were Jews and there were non-Jews, Jews and Gentiles. And what Josephus finds interesting, so much so that he notes it, is that this man named Jesus, he drew both crowds together. He dropped the racial divide between everybody and he drew them all together. He goes on to say, he was the Christ. This is very important. See, Josephus was a Jew. He was a Roman Jew. So he knew that the Jews had been waiting for what was called the Messiah. So some people think that Jesus Christ, you hear Jesus Christ, like Christ is Jesus' last name. It's not his last name. It's just the Greek word for the Hebrew word Messiah, which means Savior. So the Jews had been waiting for a Savior for several millennia. And Josephus recognized that Jesus was the Christ. He was the Messiah, the one who had been promised. And he goes on to say, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day. As the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day. There's a few things that I think are super noteworthy about Josephus' writing as a historian. One, he recognizes that Jesus is unlike any other human being to ever walk on the planet. Because he says, like, he was a man, wonderful man, if it's even lawful to call him a man. He goes on to declare that he's the one that the Jews have been waiting for thousands of years. He was the Christ, the Savior, the one who was coming. He declares that Jesus had met with his followers after he came back from the dead. Like he was dead, he was in the grave, he came back to life 3 days later. That's pretty incredible, right? I mean, think about that. I said this last year, I said it the year before, I'll probably say it again next year. Like if you had a friend who was making incredibly audacious claims to you, and at some point you're like, bro, time out. How can I believe what you're saying? This just seems ridiculous to me. And he's like, check this out. I'm going to die. They're going to bury me. 3 days later, I'm going to come back to life. And then he does. Would you lean in and listen to what I had to say? Absolutely is the answer, okay? I would absolutely, like you've got a ton of credibility now in my eyes. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. So Josephus is like, his followers continued following him. Why? Because 3 days later, he came back up out of the grave, and they gave their lives to the cause that he started when he came to the earth. And then he goes on to say, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct to this day. You see, Josephus knew as a historian that there had been many messiahs that had risen up throughout the ages who made bold claims of who they were. And then they died, and their movement died out. And now 64 years later, Josephus takes note, like Jesus died a long time ago, and his followers continue to follow after him to this day. It was noteworthy enough for a historian to mark it down, like they continue to follow him today. Why? Because Easter Sunday is the best validation for the resurrection, or the resurrection is the best validation for the fact that Jesus is the hope for humanity. So again, history tells us Jesus lived, died, buried, came back to life 3 days later. The scriptures tell us why. Because the scriptures tell us that Jesus, this man Jesus, was God. He is God. That he lived the life that we couldn't. That he died the death we deserve. Let me unpack that for you a little bit. Us as humans, we were created to be worshipers of God. But rather than worshiping God, the Bible tells us that we decided to worship created things instead of the Creator himself. What were we doing? We were pursuing different promises. And we gave ourselves away to different promises, therefore fracturing our relationship with God. A relationship that cannot be mended by you and I just doing better, just being better people. Something else needed to happen. So Jesus comes and he lives this perfect relationship with God the Father. He lives it perfectly. And then he dies the death that we deserve. The scriptures also tell us that the penalty for sin, this fracturing of relationship, is death. So Jesus shows up on the scene. He's like, you guys can't handle the problem you got on your hands on your own. I'm here to solve it for you. So he lives a life we couldn't, dies the death that we deserve. He gets buried. 3 days later, he comes back to life so that you and I can find life in him. That's what the scriptures tell us. That's what we celebrate some 2,000 years later on Easter Sunday morning. This reality, this promise that you and I can find life through Jesus Christ. In fact, I don't want you just to take my word for it. I want you to hear the words of Jesus himself. It's in John chapter 10, verse 10. And this is what Jesus has to say. He says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. See, in these two sentences, Jesus juxtaposes two different belief systems. Two different gospels. In the first belief system or the first gospel, the first promise, he tells us that there is a head of it, like there is a leader to that movement, and it's the thief. And the thief, he says, comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. The Bible is very clear from cover to cover that there is an enemy of our soul, and he's got one goal in mind. It's to deceive us into believing a different promise, that there's something else out there that can fulfill us. And he says his goal is to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, you know thieves, they're cunning, right? They put news articles in national magazines about like special solar-powered dryers. There was a lot of truth in what they wrote, but there was also a lot of falseness in it as well. When the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, it's not like you're sitting in your living room drinking coffee and the thief comes sneaking through your window. Like, yo, dude, I'm here, right? They sneak in when you least expect it. And what is their goal? To steal, to kill, and destroy. But then Jesus gives us the other gospel, the true gospel. He says, but I have come that you might find life and have it more abundantly. See, there's two gospels. His, which leads to life, and all others which lead to death. All others. See, Jesus is the only way to true life. And his way brings abundant life. The thief's way brings death and destruction. Now, we're introduced to the thief really early on in the scriptures. All the way back in Genesis, first book of the Bible, chapter 3. If you haven't read it before, I encourage you to do it this week because that's our first introduction to the thief. The thief shows up in the book of Genesis as a serpent peddling empty promises. And he shows up on the scene in the garden. God had created the garden. He had created Adam and Eve, said this is very good. He gave them free reign of the whole place. It's all yours. Have it. Enjoy it. Subdue it. Like, go make babies and have a blast doing it, right? Like, that's God's command. It says, but don't eat from that tree. Can't eat from that. And what does Adam and Eve do? They decide to listen to a serpent who begins to, question God's authority, question God's goodness. Did he really say that you can't eat of that tree? Are you sure? Did he really say that you were going to die? Like, come on, seriously, take a bite. You'll find out you're not going to die. It's fine. And then he begins to, undermine God's goodness. The reason why God told you that you can't have that is because he's trying to withhold something from you. There's some goodness out there that you can have apart from him, and he doesn't want you to know about it. But when you eat from that tree, then you'll finally know everything you need. You'll be like God, he says. That's the introduction. He's peddling empty promises. Sure enough, they eat from the tree. There's relational fracture between them and God and between one another. All of a sudden, they're blaming each other, pointing fingers at one another, right? There's this fracture that happens in humanity, separating us from God. It's an incredibly sad picture. Now, here's the deal. The same thief is still peddling the same empty promises. He changed his disguise. Doesn't look like it's not a snake squirming around talking to you anymore. He wrapped it up in different ways. Remember, every gospel has a promise, every gospel has a pathway, and every gospel has a payment. And the thief is still today peddling empty promises, making promises that he is bankrupt on, he cannot fulfill. And let's jump into the three things every gospel has. Number one is this: every gospel, like I said, it has a promise. Every gospel has a promise. Have you ever suffered from the when I, then I? Anybody? When I, then I's? Yeah, it's a terrible disease. It goes something like this. When I get my license, then I'll be completely free. Anybody looking to get their license in here? I remember when I was 15, 16 years old, I was like, oh man, give me them keys and I will finally hit the road completely free. Or how about this? When I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, then I'll feel valuable. When I graduate college, then I'll feel accomplished. When I get my career started, then I'll finally have purpose. When I get married and have kids, then I'll be completely fulfilled, right? All I want to do is get married and move to the suburbs. I just want that nice house, 30-acre lot, not too much grass, but enough grass to throw a football in the backyard. I can keep it well manicured, white picket fence, right? We get this. That's our desire. That's our dream. When I get that, then I will finally be fulfilled. All I'm looking for is 2.5 kids. 2.5 kids, and we're set. We're good. It's a national average. I don't know how you get 2.5 kids, but it's a national average, okay? Then I'm finally going to be fulfilled. When I get that promotion, then I'll be content. When I retire, then I'll be anything I want to be. It's this carrot out at the edge of the road. It always just seems to be a bit out of reach. It's just out there far enough for you not to be able to grasp it, not to be able to get a hold, not to finally find fulfillment and contentment in that thing. Now, interesting, all of the things that I read in the when I's, then I's, none of those were bad things. None of them were bad things. In fact, it was St. Augustine, way back in the 3rd century, who recognized, generally speaking, the promises that we pursue as people, they are good things. We just turn them into ultimate things. And we pursue after them, and we put pressure on them that they can never withhold because they weren't meant for that. The ultimate thing was always meant to be Jesus and Jesus alone. Anytime we elevate something above Jesus, we make it an ultimate thing, and it will ultimately let us down because it can't come through on his promise. It is a bankrupt endeavor to put our hope and trust in anything other than Jesus. And that's why Jesus said in John 10:10 that I came that you may have life and have it more abundantly. You see, Jesus was making an incredible promise that inside of him, it doesn't mean all of your worries go away. It doesn't mean all of your cares go away. It doesn't mean life gets like incredibly better and no bad things start happening. It just means that despite all of those things, you can find complete contentment, complete fulfillment, and complete purpose in him and him alone. And friends, he does not not come through on his promises. Jesus always comes through. The second is every gospel has a pathway. Every gospel has a path. So there's a promise, there's a carrot at the end of the road that we're searching, and there's a pathway to get there. I already laid out for you the American dream, right? Graduate, go to college, get a career, married, house in the burbs, 2.5 kids, we're set. One day I'll retire, and then I can do whatever I want from that point forward. Like that's the American dream. That's the goal. That's the desire. Or some others, they're pursuing this pathway through religious effort and religious works and religious deeds. And that pathway looks like this. Work harder to do good. Work harder to be better. And if you're just a better person, then hopefully when this is all said and done, the cosmic scales of justice will weigh in your favor, that your good will outweigh your bad, and therefore will procure you some better place than this place right now. Like if you're a Hindu, you get reincarnated into something, you know, or you're, for you, maybe you think heaven is just if I do enough good works, then I get to spend eternity in heaven where there's gold streets and pearly gates, and I just got to try harder. If I just try harder, I can make this happen. In fact, this is what separates Christianity from all other religions. All other religions are a system by which man works their way to God. But in Christianity, God comes to man. He becomes one of us, lives the life that we couldn't, died the death we deserve, was buried, comes back to life so that we can find life in him. And that's why Jesus says in John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. There is a modern and prevailing ideology today that all paths lead to heaven. All paths get you to God, and I want you to know that that is false. That is the thief peddling empty promises. Jesus made it abundantly clear. There is one way to the Father, and it's not by doing better, it's by surrender. We don't get to the Father by being better human beings. Jesus didn't come to make you and I better people. He came to set dead people and bring them back to life. That's what he did. So the pathway to the true gospel is through Jesus and Jesus Christ alone. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. The third is every gospel has a payment. So it's got a promise, it's got a pathway, and there's a payment involved. There is a cost associated with whatever gospel you are pursuing. There's a cost associated. And in the false gospel, the humans pay. The humans pay. You pay with your resources. You pay with your time. You pay with your effort. You pay with your relationships. You pay with your finances, just your dollars, right? Like you pay. Whatever it is you're pursuing, you are paying something in hopes of the promise at the end, right? I think back to Johnny Manziel. He paid with thousands upon thousands of hours throwing a football on a football field in hopes that when he got to the NFL that it would all pay off. And then he got there and realized this whole thing was debunked. So in the false gospel, the one that the thief is peddling, the human always pays. Always pays. But in the true gospel, the good news that God becomes man, lives, dies, comes back to life so that we can have life in him. In the true gospel, God pays. God pays. The payment for our gospel message is the fact that God pays. He gets up on the cross on Good Friday. Think about this. On Good Friday, Jesus gets up on the cross and he bears the punishment for our sin, for my sin and for your sin. And when he's on that cross, he says these words. We find it in John 19:30. He says this, "It is finished." It is finished. What is finished? Well, another way to say it is paid in full. That the penalty that we deserved, Jesus hung on the cross and said, I got it covered. Paid in full. Yes, there was a payment, and Jesus paid all of it for us. So on Good Friday, he says, it is finished. But how do we know we should believe that? Are you sure I don't have to just work harder, just do better? Like, how many have been frustrated by that endeavor? Like, I'm just going to try to do better, be a better human being. I'm just going to pull my bootstraps. I'm just trying to grit it out, and I'm just going to try to be better. Isn't that a frustrating endeavor? Yeah, because wherever I go, there I am. And I bring the same problems with me, don't I? So on Good Friday, Jesus says, it is finished. But how can I trust you, Jesus? Because on Sunday, after being in the grave for 3 days, on Sunday, he came back to life. How can we believe him? Because he said he would, and then he did. And because of that, we can find life in him. And it's what C.S. Lewis, the philosopher, calls the divine exchange. It's a beautiful thing. There's not a better deal out there. This is the divine exchange broken down into simple terms. We give God all of our badness, and in exchange, he gives us all of his goodness. Sounds like a pretty good deal, huh? God, here is all that I've done wrong. And he says, son, here is all that's been done right. I give it to you as a gift. And all I have to do to receive that gift is that, simply receive it. Now, why in the world would a God go through all of those lengths to do that for me? Just a punk kid born and raised in Port Orchard, Washington. I don't know what your story is, but I'm guaranteed your town wasn't as bad as mine. Why would God do that? Well, Jesus tells us. He tells us why he would do that. And it's in the most famous verse probably of all time. In fact, you don't have to have spent much time around church, if any at all, to know this verse. My guess, I've got no data to prove it, but I'm guessing this is the most quoted verse of all time. In fact, it's the first verse that I memorized as a kid trying to get candy bars in Royal Rangers. And then a kid showed up and said, Jesus wept as the verse. And I was like, that's my verse next week. I can remember that one. The most quoted verse of all time tells us the why. And it's John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. You see, Jesus was making a bold claim, a promise that only he can come through on, because Jesus is the hope for humanity. If we could have the worship team come at this time. As they come, I want to read one more quote. It's from a missionary. His name is Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot gave up his life proclaiming the gospel that you've heard this morning. He went to the farthest reaches, to the most lonely tribes. In fact, his last journey was to a tribe of cannibals, and they ended up killing him when he got there. But he was going there to present this gospel message. And this is what Jim Elliot had to say about the gospel. He said this: he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. He is no fool to give up what he cannot keep. Whatever promise you're pursuing right now, it cannot fulfill you. If it is not Jesus, it cannot fulfill you. It won't fulfill you. It will only leave you empty in the end. And Jim Elliot says, to give that up is not a foolish endeavor, especially when you gain something that you cannot lose, eternity with God the Father. So Jesus is hope for humanity. But Jesus isn't just the hope for humanity. Jesus is your hope as well. He's your only shot at finding complete fulfillment, complete purpose, complete contentment, complete security. There is no other. Jesus is your hope. And I know for many of you in here today, if you haven't surrendered your life to Jesus yet, you haven't said yes to him, you're pursuing or you're putting your ultimate hope in something other than him. You just got to know before we leave here today that putting your ultimate hope in anything or anyone other than Jesus will leave you wanting at best, right? It's like you open up the package, you look at it, and you're like, nah, that's not what I paid for. It left you wanting. To pursue anything other than Jesus will leave you wanting at best. But more than likely, it's going to leave you anxious, angry, lonely, confused, or worst of all, utterly hopeless. Completely hopeless. But what I want to be crystal clear on this morning is that Jesus provides where all other promises fail. That he is the hope for humanity. And all he says is, here's the gift. Will you receive it? Will you take it? Would you stand to your feet this morning? We've got 3 takeaways from today's message. Number 1 is this: respond to Jesus' invitation. Just respond to his invitation. He's given it. Anybody who would come to me, Jesus says, I will receive you. My hope, my prayer has been leading up to this Easter gathering that for some of you who once a year I get the opportunity to tell you about this gospel message, and then year after year you walk out these doors and you forget about the message and you just go on about life, that this year is the year you decided to make a decision, to make a choice, to accept the invitation that Jesus offers. Don't push it off for another year. If you push it off till next year, this is what I could guarantee you. You surrender your life next year, you'll say this: I wish I would have done that a year ago. I wish I would have given myself to Jesus a year ago. So the invitation is open, and I'm going to be up here in the front. And if you want to have a conversation about what it looks like to follow Jesus with your life, to find true hope, I'm right here, and I'd love to talk with you about it. Now, I get that's a courageous walk to step out of your chair, to walk 75 feet down in front of a bunch of strangers. I totally get that. Not for everybody. I think you could do it. Like, I looked at around the room, and I thought, yeah, capable, they could do it. I'll be here. But if you don't want to make that walk, whoever invited you here today, they're more than capable to have a conversation with you about what it looks like to follow Jesus. So just start talking to them about it. Ask them, what does it look like to surrender? What does it look like to follow? Begin the conversation. Number 2, take time to be grateful for the hope found in Jesus. I hope you all take a walk today. You walk out in that sunshine and just spend time being thankful. Jesus didn't die on the cross so we could gorge ourselves with ham this afternoon. Now, we'll do that. Fair game. But that's not why he came. So take time in reflection, being grateful for what Jesus did on the cross. And number 3 is this: carve out next Sunday to come back and spend some time with us. We're going to have a panel of people up here. We got 5 people who are ready to share about their journey with Jesus and how they've pursued him and how they haven't regretted it along the way. So would you come back next week as we kick off our new series called Hope Restored, and listen to what other people have to say about what it looks like to follow Jesus for decades of their life and how they don't regret it. I'm going to pray, the band's going to sing, and then I'll be here if you want to talk about following Jesus. So Lord, thank you. You didn't have to come, but you chose to. We were the rebels. We were the ones who lived in disobedience. But God, you came and rescued us. thank you so much. Thank you for the celebration of Resurrection Sunday, where we can point to the cross and all that you purchased. And thank you for those 3 powerful words: it is finished. God, help us to walk in the finished work that you did on the cross. In your precious name.